Those of you who have been a part of all 2 days of this Religion and Diplomacy Conference can rejoice that you're getting close to the end. This is the last panel of the last 2 days of this very exciting conference on religion and diplomacy, which has explored so many ways in which religion matters to foreign policy in various regions of the world and on a number of global cross-cutting issues. I'm Timothy Shaw. I'm Associate Director of the Religious Freedom Project at the Berkley Center here at Georgetown. Let me say again what a privilege and honor it has been for the Berkley Center to co-sponsor this portion of the Religion and Diplomacy Conference with the Secretary of State's Office of Religion and Global Affairs. Great privilege to work with Special Representative Sean Casey and his extraordinary team, which includes Leora Dannon and so many others. Very exciting to be working with all of you, Peter Mandeville. And it's also great to see so many friends and colleagues who've been working on the intersection of religion and global affairs over so many years. Great to see so many of you here to discuss such important and timely issues. The focus of this afternoon's panel is a tale of two trends between xenophobia and inclusion. And it is a great privilege to host, to moderate this discussion because we have such impressive experts who not only have analyzed these trends at the very highest level, but have on the ground been practitioners of inclusion, of promotion of tolerance, of religious understanding, not just over a few years, but over many, many, many years in many, many parts of the world. So it really is an extraordinary privilege to moderate this discussion. You're in for a real treat. I want to just note that, of course, the two trends we will be discussing, trends of exclusion, trends of xenophobia, trends in many cases of restriction, of persecution, and at the same time trends of inclusion, of promotion of religious freedom, respect for conscience, of tolerance. We can see these trends operating all over the world, all around us. We heard news this morning of a terrible attack on a mosque in Dresden, which illustrates the trend of xenophobia, an attack that was immediately described using the term xenophobia. We've seen terrible instances of Islamophobia across Western countries in recent years. Some of this xenophobia and Islamophobia have been a result of exaggerated fears about refugees and what refugees might bring. Just to give one example, a 6th grade Muslim girl was attacked in December 2015 by 3 boys in a New York public school. The boys ripped off her hijab and taunted her as ISIS. We see reports of that sort in many, many Western countries. We also see around the world terrible attacks on a wide range of religious communities, groups that are often targeted precisely because of their religious beliefs and identities. We see Hindus targeted in Bangladesh. We see Muslims targeted in Burma. We see Christians targeted in Egypt and many, many other countries. And of course, just a few months ago, Secretary of State John Kerry on March 17th declared several religious minority groups in the Middle East to be victims of not just intolerance, but genocide. So we see attacks, discrimination, intolerance rising even to the level of genocide. To frame this afternoon's discussion a bit more broadly and deeply, I thought it would be appropriate to just begin with a brief mention of perhaps the most important statement that the international community has produced on the issues that we will be discussing today. And the document to which I'm referring is the 1981 United Nations General Assembly's Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief. It's especially appropriate to mention this very important declaration given the theme of this afternoon's panel, but also given that this declaration was issued just about exactly 35 years ago. So this is an important anniversary for a very important statement. The Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and of Discrimination Based on Religion or Belief begins with a theme that was discussed in the previous panel. It begins by affirming that one of the basic principles of the Charter of the United Nations is that of the dignity and equality inherent in all human beings, and that all member states have pledged themselves to take joint and separate action in cooperation with the organization to promote and encourage universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. The Declaration goes on to affirm that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenants on Human Rights proclaim the principles of non-discrimination and equality before the law and the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. The Declaration also, in its preamble, notes that the disregard and infringement of human rights and fundamental freedoms, in particular of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or whatever belief, have brought directly or indirectly wars and great suffering to mankind, especially where they serve as a means of foreign interference in the internal affairs of other states and amount to kindling hatred between peoples and nations. It's worth noting the powerful declarations of this Declaration of the UN General Assembly, because the document underscores the profound extent to which norms of inclusion and tolerance are rooted in the international human rights framework. In particular, the Declaration of 1981 underscores how much inclusion and tolerance depend on respect for what the Declaration calls the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. And in doing this, of course, the Declaration echoes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, Article 18. In other words, any international diplomacy that seeks to engage religion in a serious way must be animated by a vision of radical inclusion and tolerance, rooted in respect for the universal right of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief. That, in a sense, is the bright moral beacon, the shining vision that the Declaration holds out for us in this conversation today, a vision of radical inclusion and inclusive tolerance. At the same time, though, if that moral beacon casts a bright light on our work that inspires us, that very light exposes how radically our world is failing. The very bright light of this moral and universal vision also exposes grave darkness and grave obstacles to radical inclusion. These obstacles and threats, again, range from exclusionary attitudes and forms of xenophobia to violent restrictions, even religious and ethnic cleansing, even genocide, even very, very serious forms of religious persecution, and other forms of exclusion and discrimination of individuals and groups based on their religious beliefs, practices, communities, and identities. Any serious diplomatic engagement with religion must be cognizant of these many grave threats to the lofty moral vision that animates the 1981 Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and of Discrimination based on Religion or Belief. So we will be confronting these two themes. We will be discussing in realistic ways the grave threats to a vision of radical inclusion and tolerance and religious freedom, but we will also be discussing opportunities that many of us in this room have had to counter the darkness, to provide alternatives to patterns of discrimination, violence, and exclusion. And again, the distinguished panelists that we will be talking with this afternoon have themselves been leaders in promoting inclusion, tolerance, and interreligious understanding. And I'm now going to introduce each of our panelists in turn, and then we'll begin a conversation about these issues of these two trends of xenophobia on the one hand, but also efforts at inclusion and tolerance. I first would like to introduce Imam Hendi, Imam Yahya Hendi, who is the Muslim chaplain at Georgetown University. Georgetown was the first American university to hire a full-time Muslim chaplain. As chaplain, he leads Friday prayers, he counsels students, and offers retreats for both Muslim and non-Muslim students. He's been a consistent advocate for interfaith understanding. Imam Hendy is the founder and president of Clergy Beyond Borders and Imams for Universe, Dignity, Human Rights, and Dialogue. He's also written numerous publications on subjects ranging from women and gender relations in Islam to religion and Islam in the United States. He's also the Imam of the Islamic Society of Frederick, the Muslim chaplain at the National Naval Medical Center, and the spokesperson of the Islamic Jurisprudence Council of North America. I'd also like to introduce Imam Zia Makhdoom, who serves as the founder and executive director of MakeSpace, an Islamic cultural hub and learning center in Washington, D.C. The main focus of his work has been to make the message of Islam relevant and practical to young people, young professionals, and others in the community. Imam Makhdoom has served the Muslim community of the Washington metropolitan area as an imam, a khatib, a teacher, a community organizer, and youth counselor for more than a decade. And Imam Makhdoom studied Islam and the Quran in Pakistan and received a degree in computer science from George Mason University. We also have with us Professor Ivan Yazbek Haddad, who is professor of the history of Islam and Christian-Muslim relations at the Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding here at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. Professor Haddad's fields of expertise include 20th century Islam, intellectual, social, and political history in the Arab world, and Islam in North America and the West. Her most recent research focuses on Muslims in the West, as well as Islamic revolutionary movements. She's the author or editor of numerous books, including Becoming American, The Forging of Arab and Muslim Identity in Pluralist America, Muslim Women in America, Muslim Minorities in the West, and Islam, Gender, and Social Change. She also has more degrees than a thermometer, as a friend of mine likes to say. She holds a BA from Beirut College for Women, an MRE from Boston University, an MA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a PhD from Hartford Seminary. And finally, right next to me here is Professor Paul Heck, who is professor of Islamic Studies in Georgetown University's Department of Theology, and he's also founding director of the Study of Religions Across Civilizations, or SORAC. His main scholarly interest is common theological ground between Christianity and Islam. His current research includes the theological value of emotions in Islam, martyrdom, scriptural reasoning, and political theology. His monographs include Common Ground, Islam, Christianity, and Religious Pluralism, and Skepticism in Classical Islam, Moments of Confusion. He continues to develop the concept of theohumanism as a curricular venture for the teaching of undergraduate students, teaching undergraduate students theology in the age of the unchurched. And you can visit his blog, A Nation in Need of Theology, at paulheck.org. I'm tempted to ask him whether the debate last night illustrated a nation in need of theology, but we won't go there right now. So let's begin. I'm first going to ask our panel to focus on the darkness that we just already heard about, patterns that worry you most in terms of discrimination, exclusion. And I'd like you to talk about whatever you are most concerned about in terms of discrimination, intolerance, xenophobia that targets individuals and groups based, at least partly, on their religious beliefs, practices, communities, and identities. What, in your mind, are the gravest patterns that we're perhaps not focusing on? And also, I'd like you to talk a bit about what are some of the drivers of these patterns of intolerance, discrimination, and xenophobia. Big question, I realize, and I invite you to take whatever bite of the question that you would most like to begin. So yes,
start off.
Professor Heck.
Yeah. First of all, it's a huge issue, and so I think each of us is just only going to be able to, cast a little bit of light on one aspect of it, and these are also very emotionally charged issues, and so if you get emotionally charged over the course of the next hour, then that should be the way it is. we're all implicated, I think. The issue I'd like to focus on is state authoritarianism, whether that's faith-based, confessional, secular, ideological, state authoritarianism. So when a state rules in the name of an ideology, that sets the assumption that people, citizens, can be persecuted, prosecuted, harmed if they have beliefs that are different from the official beliefs of the state. So I think state authoritarianism really sets the pattern. Hate groups or vigilante groups, in a way, they're really just mimicking the state, state authoritarianism that says, yes, people can be persecuted, prosecuted, harmed. So ISIS beheads people. Well, they're just mimicking a state in large respect that says you can do that you can behead people when they differ from you in their beliefs. This is also a secular phenomenon. France is one recent example of that. Islamophobia makes sense for people when the state promotes official suspicions and even criminalization of pious behavior that's at odds with what the state has defined as acceptable behavior or dress codes and so on and so forth. So this is not to pick on one kind of ideological authoritarianism. It's authoritarianism, whether religious or secular. Just a couple days ago, a Jordanian was killed, Nahid Hattar, and the press, or some voices in the press, made it out to be this like Islamic extremist hatred of Christianity, and there might be something of that there, but we forget that it was a case that was being prosecuted by the state, and it was elements in the state that were inciting and instigating it. A voice that was actually had been speaking out, had been offering different views of those that are held by the state. I could go on, but I think we can't lose sight of that. And this is partly a phenomenon of the modern nation state, and we're not going to get too academic here, but this phenomenon of state authoritarianism just setting the standard for people's citizens to be persecuted, prosecuted, harmed. Now, if I can just take another minute here and speak briefly to the driving factors, I would say educational institutions are really a big problem. And I'll just give an example from the Arab world and an example from the American world. So a lot of places that I go to in Arab countries, the religious education curriculum, it flows out of the needs of the state authoritarianism. The religious education in the schools flows out of the needs of the state's authoritarianism. And so as a result, the state wants to keep its citizens in the dark about other religions, about serious engagement with other religions, other points of view in their own religion. It wants to keep them in dark about critical theological thinking. When you rule in the name of an ideology, you don't want people to think differently from that. And so that translates, that keeping the people in the dark as a result of that religious education curriculum translates into online hate mimicking, right? What the young people are doing online in a way is just mimicking what flows out of that state authoritarianism into the religious education curriculum. Here too, perhaps for other reasons, in the West, in America, the study of Islam is so geared to thinking about Islam as a political phenomenon or a security concern. And that inculcates in American students a sense that Islam is a problem to be solved and controlled, rather than a friend that can enrich us theologically and spiritually. That's the case here at Georgetown. Let's be frank. We don't have a major here in Islam that really focuses on Islam as a theological, spiritual phenomenon that's enriching. The assumption across this university is that Islam is a political phenomenon, a security agenda, And so to what extent are universities like Georgetown implicated? I mean, to be honest. And then that kicks up. I mean, we'll get to this a little bit later, but I just quickly want to point out that then kicks up into the foreign service officers because they're graduates of places like this. And that assumption gets inculcated in them, and then they bring that to their work, and that's how they look at things. There's a lot to talk about here, but I think the religious, the way religions are taught, whether in Arab countries or here, I just think it sets a tone in people to look at the other with suspicion, if not deep animosity.
Thank you, Professor Heck. What you described makes me think of some academic trends in which there's often a tendency in the way we think about the narrative of religion's involvement in Western politics. It presupposes that religion is a problem that had to be contained. William Kavanaugh has written about the myth of religious violence, for example, in ways that are connected with your remarks. Professor Haddad.
Going on from what Professor Heck said, maybe I'll share with you some of my research on Islamic fundamentalism. I started doing this work very early on. I won't tell you how old I am. But basically, I was looking at Sayyid Qutb, who is considered to be the theologian that inspired Islamic fundamentalism, ISIS, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, and so on and so forth. I was looking at his visit to the United States, specifically his residence in Washington, D.C., and we have looked at the documents in the National Archives. We're still trying to figure out whether he was a CIA agent. That doesn't come from me. It comes from his colleagues in Egypt, because the United States, after the Second World War, set up on a project which is to create Islam as a firewall against the spread of communism. And his book, Social Justice in Islam, was translated into every Muslim language: Bahasa, Swahili, Urdu, Bengali, Turkish, Farsi. And what's most interesting for me at the moment, because I don't know any Farsi, I discovered from one of my students that Ayatollah Khamenei, the current ruler, Ayatollah of Iran, translated his book into Farsi. Eventually, we found out he has translated all his books to Farsi. And who paid for the translation? It was the Franklin Institute, which was a CIA operation in Cairo. So a question then comes is, why did America set up this fundamentalist Islam? And Muslims in Cairo were asking that question. At the moment, after 9/11, the US government has decided that it's going to try and create a more inclusive Islam. And that's why they are very suspicious about American government manipulating Islam. They're suspicious about any of the imams who work with the American government, suspicious about any of the scholars who get funding from the American government, because they think it is just a new policy to manipulate Islam. I have been involved in Christian-Muslim dialogue with the National Council of Churches and with the group which is run by the Archbishop of Canterbury, with the
Building Bridges, is that the
no, with the one with the Sheikh Al-Azhar.
Right.
And I've been with them for 7 years, and we're holding a conference next month. The thing that was interesting to me is I was doing research on the history of dialogue in the Middle East, that the Muslims who were engaged in dialogue, the initial people, talk about the fact that suddenly, out of nowhere, these missionaries who were in Lebanon and Egypt, who were always saying, unless you convert to Islam, you will amount to nothing. Your religion is false, your prophet is false, suddenly said, we don't want to do a mission anymore. Come, let us dialogue. So they became very suspicious that dialogue is a new way of mission, of a way of undermining Islam. So that in their reflections on the history of dialogue as they experienced it, they said that at the beginning they used to listen to these people and say, where is the new way of undermining Islam? Because they didn't trust them. And that was because it was the government of the United States, it was Foster Dulles himself, who told the missionaries, who told the World Council of Churches, don't emphasize mission. From now on, we want to have dialogue. So there is a great deal of suspicion that even this some inclusion idea, that you believe what I do, you be nice and open and reinterpret Islam to be inclusive, is just serving the interests of the United States policy at the moment. I'll stop and you can ask some other questions. I'll talk about some more.
Very good. Thank you. Imam Hindi.
I want to move it a little bit away from the theory, however important it is, into experiences. My daughter, who is a drum major of her high school band, a captain in her basketball team, straight A student, and you would not differentiate between her and any of her non-Muslim American colleagues in her high school. Yet because of her name, she's told, well, go back to your country. Or because she might say an Arabic word once in a while, oh my God, then you are ISIS. So on the ground, there are these images that are magnified on our TV screens, images that are magnified in some churches and some synagogues and some institutions to create this taboo called Islam in America. And oh my God, and she was told, how can a Muslim be the drum major of her high school band? Muslims are taking over. This is the image. You see a Muslim successful in a dean in a college, oh my God, Muslims are taking over. Or a Muslim going up in the military, or a captain in the Navy, Muslims are taking over. Recently, an article about Muslims in the State Department. Oh my God, there are 100 Muslims in the State Department. It's a matter of 10 years and Muslims are taking over America. America is becoming a caliphate. Well, these are the images that you hear. And naturally, in America, you have this natural response. Oh my God, Muslims are taking over America. What's going on? So I call this a legalized with an ethical view, with an ethical color to it, about called discrimination. So yes, you can fire her because she wears hijab, or you cannot promote them because of their name or their background. Sometimes that is given legal justification in America. But if I want to move beyond seas and go, there is discrimination of Shia communities in majority Sunni communities. And there are discrimination against Sunnis in Shia majority countries, or against Baha'is in Sunni majority countries, or against the Christians or Jews. So this seems to be the growing phenomena all over the world. And where are we heading? I don't know. Unless we can give in to the voice of sanity and say, where are we heading? This is not what we intended to be. Now, the sources and why. One could talk about so many things, including what I call, for me to be good and to be right, you must be wrong. For me to feel good about who I am, you must be wrong. And therefore, for American Christians to feel good about American Christianity, they have to demonize Islam and Muslims. And for Sunni Muslims to feel good about Sunni Islam, they have to demonize Shia Muslims or Baha'is or other minorities in their midst. Or for Jews to feel good about their own Jewishness, they have to undermine Palestinian Muslims or Christians in their own midst. So this seems to be the case wherever you go. To glorify yourself, to feel good about yourself, let me demonize others. And sometimes the feeling of the fear of losing. is Christian America losing its Christianity because now we're having 12 million new immigrants, because we have Muslim refugees, or because we have Muslims? Oh my God, maybe we should call America something else. So this fear of losing our identity that we think we are would lead to all kinds of forms of discrimination and what comes with it.
Thank you very much. So there's the root cause, or a root cause of discrimination, is in fact a kind of feeling of insecurity about one's own identity.
In the Islamic tradition, you have this, Imam Ali said, you fear that which you do not know.
Yeah.
And it's natural for America to fear Islam because it does not know Islam.
Yeah.
As Dr. Hicks said, if America were to indulge itself with that spiritual aspect of Islam, it would love Islam, it would welcome Islam, and it would want Islam to be an ingredient, natural ingredient of its fabric.
Thank you, Imam Hindi. Imam Makhdum, what are your thoughts on this trend of the xenophobia, intolerance? What worries you most under this heading?
I think it's got to be implicit bias, if I may borrow something from last night's debate, that plays a big role in xenophobia and discrimination that we're witnessing here and around the world. And institutionalized discrimination, as distinguished panelists referred to, that has to be part of it as well. Whether it is the Muslim world where minorities such as Ahmadis or Shias are being discriminated against, or Sunnis being discriminated against, depending on which nation they live in, or refugees, mostly from Muslim background, and in Europe being systematically, legally discriminated against, such as the hijab ban in France, or some of the more implicit forms of this type of discrimination and hate that we see in America, that is now one of the underlying factors behind one of the two campaigns that we see in America. And so the factors behind these, I think when I look at growing up in the 80s and 90s and I compare that to today, what I see is the internet plays a big role. The media does play a role, but the media doesn't give you unlimited information. The media maybe misinforms you a little bit, but then you go on the internet, and unlike when there was no internet, you had to go find accurate information. Now, any biases that you have, any kind of hatred that you have towards others, any misconceptions that you have, any ignorance that's out there, almost all of it can be validated online. And so that subjective information and validation of your biases, they're out there. And so it's so easy. I mean, I personally, it hit home for me when I was part of an interfaith dialogue, and one of the organizers sent me an email saying that one of our congregants from a Judeo-Christian, I don't remember if it was Jewish or a Christian congregation, but they had sent them a link that had me on one of these Islamophobic websites. There's a website, I think it's Front Page Magazine. I would be surprised if Imam Hindi is not on it, but basically any and every Muslim activist that you can think of, they are listed on some of these Islamophobic websites as threats and as supporters of terrorism, as the fifth column, etc. So you can validate any of your fears, any of your hatred that you have, discrimination that you want to have against others online. And that's a powerful tool that's at the disposal of people who promote hatred and xenophobia.
If I may mention that, in one of these websites, they say that Imam Hindi is one of the most 5 dangerous American Muslims. Why? Because for 10 years of research, we found nothing bad about him. So he must have succeeded to prove us that he's good, but he must be bad.
You're a stealth Islamist. We need to watch out for you. Well, I'll add my own thoughts in terms of looking at grave patterns of discrimination and intolerance based on religious belief and community. To mention a trend that connects with what Secretary Kerry designated in terms of the genocide on March 17th, designation of a variety of minority communities in the Middle East as victims of genocide, Yazidis, Christians, and others. And if you look around the world, it's remarkable the extent to which minority communities like this are the subject of growing intolerance and discrimination. And I'll just mention the Christian community. Yvonne and I were part of a project together that looked at the trends in terms of discrimination against Christians, and this project found that something like 500 million Christians in the world live in countries where they're liable to some form of serious discrimination or intolerance. I suspect a lot of that is driven by precisely what Professor Heck and Imam Maktoum, Imam Hindi, and Professor Haddad all talked about, namely an increasing, almost tight connection between state power, national identity, and religion. More and more countries have states that are imposing the idea that there really is only one acceptable way to be a member of the national community, and that acceptable way has to do with religion. We see this trend in India with an aggressively Hindu nationalist government. We see this in Myanmar. We see this in many, many, many countries across the world. In some of these countries, Muslims are the victim. In many, many countries, Christians are the victim. In other countries, Hindus are the victim. In other countries, Buddhists are the victim. But this probably goes a long way to explaining the first trend that we've been talking about, this trend of xenophobia and exclusion and intolerance. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Add to that. I mean, often we think, well, in those countries where there's a religiously defined national identity, you think, oh, the majority is free,
Yeah.
the minority. Yeah. But in fact, like in Muslim countries where like non-Muslims aren't really understood to be part of the national identity, well, the Muslims themselves aren't free.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The Muslims themselves, the
Because
majority.
they have to follow the prescribed orthodoxy,
Yeah,
or they're in trouble.
they can talk too.
Yeah.
They can
Yeah.
talk too. So
Yeah.
it's not just like targeting that minority. It's like the whole nation is stripped of its ability to think what it believes. Yeah. So I just wanted to.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're now going to talk about some of the more encouraging trends in the world. Real efforts at building inclusion, religious freedom, tolerance, and as we go into this part of the discussion, I was inspired by a comment that Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks made in a book of his called From Optimism to Hope. He has a beautiful reflection. We don't have a rabbi in the panel, so I'm going to channel the Rabbi Sacks for us. Rabbi Sacks has a beautiful reflection about Hanukkah. He talks about Hanukkah in this way. He says, Hanukkah is about the freedom to be true to what we believe without denying the freedom of those who believe otherwise. It's about lighting our candle while not being threatened by or threatening anyone else's candle. And Rabbi Sacks continues, you can see religion either as a battle, a holy war, in which you win a victory for your faith by force or fear, or you can see it as a candle you light to drive away some of the darkness of the world. The difference is that the first sees other religions as the enemy, the second sees them as other candles, not threatening mine, but adding to the light that we all share. So in a way, that perhaps helps to set up the next part of the discussion. What are some of the candles that you have seen being lit to counter the dangerous trends we've been talking about? Perhaps the candle you yourself have helped to light, a candle of understanding, of partnership across faith traditions. Perhaps it's a candle you observed. But let's talk about some of the encouraging developments. Professor Haddad already warned us that dialogue might actually not be quite the force for inclusion that we might think it is. So we need to be careful and on our guard. But what are some of the positive developments you'd like to talk about?
A specific holiday which commemorates war
Yeah.
and victory.
The War of the Maccabees
And-
against the
yeah,
Greeks.
And,
Yeah.
and so there are other Jewish reflections that would show the exact opposite
Yeah.
of what he
Yeah.
says.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Because I remember in 1982, there was one imam that came from Lebanon. No, I'm sorry, he came from Jordan. And he was hosted by a mosque in Hartford, Connecticut. And the Israelis had just bombed
Yeah.
northern Lebanon. There were 100 women in a UN place, and they had killed all of them. And he talked about Jewish boys dropping Christian bombs because of American supply of munitions to the Israeli army to kill Muslims. So those are things that we have to keep in mind. You know,
Yes.
it's okay to
Yeah.
talk about lighting and stuff like that, but the reality on the ground is there is a great deal of fear and hatred.
Yes,
And
absolutely,
religion itself, you know,
Yeah.
you have religious exceptionalists, like
Yeah.
in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and Hinduism.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great, I mean, the story is a great example. I mean, of course,
Yeah.
the War of the Maccabees was precisely to defend against Hellenistic coercion and
Right.
imposition, but the story could be used for
Right.
exclusionary purposes.
Right.
But let's
Right.
focus on
Right.
focus on the light and the candles.
I could talk about my project that you mentioned, Clergy Beyond Borders.
Great. Yeah.
For so many years, I heard condemnation of clergymen and women, how bad they are, they're a part of the problem. All they do is talk about hate and exclusivity. My response was, we are becoming a part of the problem by describing them in such a way. Let's put on light in a dark night, in a dark room. And instead of excluding those clergy, let's educate them, let's train them, let's bring them to the table. And that's how Clergy Beyond Borders was founded. It was founded
When was it founded, Imam?
2008. It was founded to bring clergymen and women to the table of dialogue to celebrate their differences. That's why we called it Beyond and not Without, because we acknowledge the presence of borders between religions. And we say it's okay to have borders between religions. It's okay to be different. It's okay to see things differently. At the end of the day, how can I respect your borders? How can you respect my borders? Yet find ways to celebrate those borders or celebrate what to bring us together, what is common. And in doing so, we created the Clergy Beyond Borders made of rabbis, priests, pastors, and imams that represent the Shia, the Sunnis of the Muslim community, Orthodox Jews, and evangelical minister Christians. And we tried as much as we could to include as many of the three faiths. A specific program we did was...
Three Abrahamic faiths.
Well, I don't like the word Abrahamic.
Okay.
Because for me,
Yeah.
that excludes women.
Yeah.
The word Abraham.
Yeah.
As if there is no Sarah and Hagar.
Yeah.
And being the feminist imam, I like to be a voice for women. So I say it's the religions of Sarah, Hagar, and Abraham.
Okay.
To make sure that women are at the table. And there's no diplomacy without women. There is no solution without women. And there's no theology and moving forward without women. So this is quite a theology for me and a creed. So one of the programs we did, a caravan of reconciliation. We rented a 15-passenger van. We painted it with one arc, one humanity. We traveled through 3,200 miles, 18 states, 27 cities, and we spoke to almost 9,000 people in churches and synagogues and mosques and colleges, on campuses. We spoke in Starbucks and McDonald's, Burger King, in parks. We engaged youth, old, young, and the idea was humanity once shared one arc. Can we do that again? But as we did that, we went to areas where there are troubles, in Kentucky or in Atlanta, Georgia, or in Tennessee, where there are exclusion attitudes against Catholics or against Muslims or against Jews. And we tried to create a spirit of dialogue, a spirit of inclusion. The most powerful with which I finish was I was at a synagogue, me and the rabbi and the evangelical minister, and as I finished the sermon in a synagogue Friday evening, a lady came to me almost, she could not walk, someone had to walk her to talk to me. She hugged me with tears in her eyes and she said, "Now I can die." I said, "I'm sorry, did I say anything wrong?" She said, "No, this is my day." And I said, "How?" She said, "I lived for the day to see Jews, Christians, and Muslims worshiping together in my home, in my synagogue. Today, I am born. Today, I'm happy. Now I can go."
Beautiful.
What I am saying is, in a moment when one opened their hearts and souls, we were able, with that trip, to challenge the biases, to challenge the status quo, to challenge our misconceptions of the other. We went to areas people have not been. That's why I say...
What year did the Caravan of Conciliation?
2011.
10 years after 9/11, was that
Exactly,
intended?
it was to talk about what America is 10 years after September 11. In the state of Maryland, we created a caravan to create what we called a network, response network, to create, it was 60 individuals made of law enforcement, educators, academics, and the clergy, who were trained for almost a year to respond to voices of exclusion in the state of Maryland that are able to mobilize law enforcement, but also the academic community and the clergy when something happens in the state of Maryland. An attempt to say, let's move forward, let's build the bridges rather than create walls.
So this was not just a one-off program or trip, but you actually built a sustained program
that will
in
go
Maryland.
on for years. And we hope that every state will establish such a network that will sustain for many years to come.
Thank you, Imam Hindi. Paul, you were eager to jump in. So,
Segue. I mean, what Imam Hindi does is really the heart of the matter. At the same time, there are a lot of people who never have a chance to meet someone from another religion. And so I, as a scholar, try and address that area, because this idea of demonization of the other, it's exactly correct, and yet it's false when it comes to knowledge. I was once in southern Morocco in a Berber Amazighi village called Tiznit, and I was meeting with the local imam, and he knew that I was Christian, Roman Catholic, and he said to me, "A part of your religion is in my religion, and a part of my religion is in your religion." So suddenly, when we have that, how can we look at the other except as partner in some sense? But it needs to be really established in a kind of knowledge-based way. Interreligious dialogue is good, but sometimes it turns into flattery. People aren't always skilled in religious knowledge, the people who are involved in some of those interreligious gatherings, and so they leave still with some wondering suspicions, you know. Those people were all smiling, but, you know, they still kind of think we're infidels. So what I try and do both here and in Arab countries at the university level is to demonstrate. We have courses that show whatever the issue is, there's a common knowledge basis here. So, you know, when I'm in Morocco, for example, and people who've been kept in the dark their whole lives for reasons which I mentioned before, suddenly we encounter, and they have these rather odd ideas about Christianity, but I can spend a semester with them talking about the Trinity. I mean, no one talks about the Trinity with me anymore except Muslims, in fact. It's, they love to talk about the Trinity. So we can talk about these things, and suddenly they see, okay, we've got our differences, but he's not a polytheist, and we don't necessarily go the way of religious relativism either, right? This is not about a secular agenda, which can also be very
lowest common
yeah,
denominator.
exactly. Yeah. And sometimes they hear that from foreign service. Why can't we just secularize them, you know? So suddenly we become religious partners. But, you know, and that's true of my work here, too, at Georgetown, is really giving a knowledge basis to this. When we study the scriptures, when we study the spiritual traditions, and so on and so forth, when we do these things together at the university level, bringing groups back and forth, and suddenly we're studying these things together, and so when they suddenly start to say things about my tradition, I can correct them, and vice versa, because we're studying it together. So
it's not dialogue, it's actually common study.
Common study, yeah. But then suddenly from that comes
There's the
this
richer
fruit.
dialogue.
Yeah, because this is going to sound bad, but I actually don't.
That's okay, we're friends here. So we'll tolerate you.
My main concern in life is not about making the world a better place. I'm a scholar. My main concern is about the acquisition of religious knowledge. But I learned very early on, as I noticed my students here and there, that we can't do that. We can't have better, truer religious knowledge unless we go global with the study of religions, unless we're interacting with one another. And that'll actually give us truer, better knowledge. Hopefully it'll also bring out our better angels, but my main concern is about truer, better knowledge, because when we have truer, better knowledge, we won't be able to demonize each other anymore if we respect knowledge. On another level, this was mentioned in the earlier panel, the idea of accompaniment. Because knowledge, for it to be true, it's one thing for it to be in the mind, but it has to be in the heart. It has to be in the heart. And so in our programs, friendship is part of the way we acquire knowledge, right? I mean, think of the people who know you best and you know best. They're your friends, right? It's the same thing in academia. And so suddenly, when we're studying together, but we're also accompanying each other, the other is not just in my mind in a more accurate way, but the other is also in my heart. But this is like a long-term project. This is not like one fiscal budget year. This is like forever. Because sometimes, I have great relations with Foreign Service officers, and they're good-willed, and they do a lot of good things, but they're constrained by their annual budget. And they look for these big one-off events, or they, fly in someone, and those things are good. But, the real solution, in my opinion, is doing a caravan every year, or having these study of religions, these friendship-based but knowledge-based, year after year after year. It's the small, quiet stuff that's suddenly going to show people that the narrative, that these categories that we think are necessarily opposed, in fact, aren't. And I see that in the high school level. When I go into some places in Arab countries, and they've been influenced by bad things, but they're good people, and they want the good, but they've never been exposed to others. And so suddenly we're there, and we're talking in their language and on their cultural terms, and that night we get like 500 Facebook friend requests from the whole high school, and then suddenly, instead of doing the kind of the hate mimicking that they've been, because they've been kept in the dark, they're suddenly feeling part of a global conversations that they can build up. But we need more people to do this. It's a very simple thing. Sometimes I talk to foreign servants. They're looking for like the great big thing that's going to. It's not. It's a very simple thing. Knowledge, friendship, year after year after year. And just to go back to my earlier point, the people who want us to come into their high schools are these very pious Muslim teachers. It's the pious Muslim teachers who see the hatred in the hearts of their students, and they want that hatred to come out. And they tell me, like, we can't do it. We talk to them about, like, not all Americans or not all Christians, but when you show up, you're speaking Arabic, you're a Christian, suddenly you can do it in a way that you're helping us get the hatred out of their hearts. And it's the government authorities who pose the obstacles. It's the pious Muslim teachers who see the poison in their students' hearts and want that to come out.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, Yvonne, please.
Our center has the Bridge program, which is monitoring Islamophobia and trying to counter it. And they just came out with a study about the Catholic tradition. Mm-hmm. They found out that 30% of Catholics don't know any Muslims. And that triggered in my memory.
America, this is in America.
This is in the United States, and therefore they have negative attitudes towards Muslims. and triggered in my mind an experience I had when I was at Hartford Seminary. We decided that we'd get the United Church of Christ to invite the Muslim women from the mosque and have them for lunch. And so we taught them, don't use wine in the cooking, don't use pork, and so on and so forth. And about 2 days before the event, they called me and said, "We're panicked." I said, "What's wrong?" "What do you say to them? How can, we're going to have lunch. What do you talk about?" So we asked them to come over. They came, and we told them, they're human beings. They're mothers. They cook. They have children. They talk about the weather. Oh, it was a big revelation. But I think it's very important to have, to know a Muslim.
Yeah.
And it would help eradicate some of the hatred and the Islamophobia, which is a major industry. Over $100 million a year is spent in the United States specifically to make Americans hate Islam. And there's a couple, studies that show that. If you want, write to me and I'll give you the link to it. Muslims are aware of it, and they're very, our students are experiencing harassment and hatred, and there is a lot of fear among the young people, among children and older people. And I think it's important to reach out to them.
Mm-hmm. This is a perfect segue to your work, Imam Akram. Could you?
Yes, so one of these candles that I would like to share a little bit about is what we're doing locally in the DC area in Northern Virginia. And basically, part of it has to do with my experience as an imam at a local mosque, which was very ethnic and insular. And so, and a lot of challenges, but one of the biggest challenges I faced was the exclusion of other ethnic groups, the exclusion of women, the exclusion of young people. And these issues are not too uncommon, as Imam Yahya can attest. Chaplain Tahira is here. She knows. Samir has been very instrumental helping with the Make Space as well. So we gathered as like-minded people after almost a decade of trying to change things within the insular institution without much success. And so
Were you working in one mosque in particular, or?
Yes. Mosque will not be named.
No, I'm not asking you to name it.
And so,
To be politically correct.
absolutely. So we thought, what's the issue here? And then we reflected on what's going on and we thought the biggest challenge is we need a safe space. We need a safe space for our young people. We need a platform for the women in our community so that they're not isolated and put behind the curtain and behind the barrier. We need them to use their knowledge and expertise and experience and their know-how and their understanding of the culture to introduce Islam, not just amongst themselves, but to their neighbors. And so we started Make Space, and the word actually comes from a verse of the Quran, and we made space for everyone. And for almost 3 years, we didn't have a physical space, and we held our events at on different campuses, libraries, rec centers, you name it, banquet halls. But the focus was on building people, on making space in our hearts, and we were actually so blessed to have Imam Yahya this past Ramadan with us, and he came and he gave a very inspirational talk at our community. And so when I look at this experience, I cannot help but think that we have within our Muslim community too many institutions that are still very insular, not just to people outside of our community, but also to people within, especially the young people, especially the women.
On ethnic lines or gender lines or whatever.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and there's a positive trend that we now see that has started even within the institutions, the insular institutions. They're slowly starting to address the issues, being more inclusive to women and young people. And I think some of that is a result of this pushback that they got from organizations like Make Space, where these alternatives became very popular amongst the young people. And we're not necessarily telling people to be perennialists. We can still disagree, and we can still, believe that we have the truth and the other guy doesn't. But, you can still live by the golden rule, because every religion almost teaches that in some way or another. Those concepts are growing up in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I will tell you honestly, they are intrinsic to Islam, but they're not really taught. No one taught me about these things, honestly, in my schooling in Afghanistan and Pakistan, that there is such a thing as embracing others despite your disagreements with them. And so that is something I believe that the American Muslim community can provide an excellent model at the community level as to how you can still be orthodox, traditional, yet still be open and be a source of love and compassion and be a community where everyone is welcome.
This goes back to what, Paul, you were saying. We tend to treat Islam in particular, maybe religion in general, as a problem to be managed, solved, controlled. In fact, you're drawing from the religious tradition to create inclusion and space. Could you tell us, what is the verse of the Quran that inspired the Make Space name?
So it's 58:11, chapter 58, verse 11, which says, "O you who believe, make space." When it's asked of you to make space for others, then make space for them. Yes, فَافْسَحُوا يَفْسَحِ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ. So that this verse, the people that have explained it, the scholars, they say it doesn't just mean the physical space. Make space for them in your communities, in your minds, and in your hearts. In other words, be inclusive and be non-judgmental and embrace everyone. It doesn't mean you agree with everything, but you can still love them and embrace them.
Thank you. Yes, Imam Hindi.
Very
And after, once you make your comment, I'm going to invite people to go to the mics who'd like to be involved in
I think everything we're hearing here is about humanizing the other. The most effective, the most powerful tool to oppose exclusivity is to humanize the other. If Jews humanize Muslims, if Muslims humanize Jews, if Christians humanize Muslims, if we humanize each other, we can overcome so many obstacles. And I think we do that when we transform dialogue to diapractice. And I have been screaming about this, the need to transform dialogue to diapractice. We are not interested only in sitting around the table to learn about each other's theologies, but rather working together in the field.
on a common problem.
On common problem, like imagine working on Habitat for Humanity project. At Georgetown University, every Tuesday, Hindus and Buddhists and Sikh and Baha'is and Christians and Jews and Muslims come together to prepare sandwiches for homeless shelters in Washington, D.C. And that Tuesday evening event has been able to create so much dialogue, so much exchange of data, no other conference was able to do. So our ability to transform so much of the philosophy and discussions into working together is what can make a difference.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll now have a more inclusive conversation, and we'll begin with you.
Yes.
And please try to mask your comment as a short question, as I think was mentioned earlier, if you can.
I noted. Ani's on about Muslims for progressive values. Inclusivity, that's our mandate and our motto for 10 years now, and we've been accused. Now I understand, based on Professor Haddad's background, I had no clue that was basically an American government propaganda at one point, or that's how it's being perceived. As far as make space, Imam Zia, that's one thing that Muslims for Progressive Values have been advocating for. It behooves us that the mosques have been so exclusive. When you include people, you bring more to the congregation. It's a no-brainer. And the fact that now you're describing is something that the Islam that I was raised on 25 years ago. And then 25 years later, we're actually going back to the Islam of 25 years. It's really mind-boggling that we have not progressed. Imam Yahya, you've been so fantastic on women and girls' rights and when you spoke at MPV's event at Washington, D.C., and I can imagine you got a lot of pushback. But I want to commend for your work and for the brevity of your positions on women and girls' rights. One question for you.
For Imam Hindi?
Yes, for Imam Hindi. When you say you include... No, I want to do a bit of poking here, though, but I want to push a little bit. Is that when you include women clergy, does it include women imamas?
Can we close the windows and the doors, turn off the light? No one is listening. Just talk to you, huh?
It's off the record now.
Off the record, yeah. And we cannot tweet, we were told yesterday. Yeah. That's the question for me? I want Tahira maybe to talk about her experience with me last night. We went out for dinner after the conference. And I introduced her to someone as my imama. So Tahira, the Muslim chaplain at Northwestern University, no, I don't like to be called imama because. And we ended up with this dialogue about her own fears of being called imam and what that means for her, and me trying to really push the agenda and push and provoke. And at Georgetown University, I want you to come, starting from the first Friday of October, where we will have a Muslim woman, a student, a professor, come and speak on Friday as a part of the Friday rituals. So that's an attempt to push for Muslim women participation in our rituals and our services. I have no problem of women being called imama. I think historically we have. I think we need to recover our history that we lost, to discover that in our Muslim history there have been so many imamas. I like Imam Shafi'i's statement. Imam Shafi'i says, I learned fiqh and jurisprudence from 40 scholars, 34 of whom were women. And Imam Shafi'i, one of the greatest imams of his time, obviously 90% of his imams and scholars were females. So I say to Muslims in the 21st century, what went wrong? That we no longer have imamas, women, who are in the forefront, dialoguing, talking, discussing, and being a part of the agenda. But I know it will happen.
If I could just add to that, so when I speak with Muslim audiences in Arab countries, I mean, I can't, as a non-Muslim, tell them what they should and shouldn't do, but I do talk about the situation in Christianity, and it's very interesting to see the responses. You know, what is kind of officially taboo, you know, but when you know, we always are able to think a little bit more broadly in the mirror of the other. And so I'll give, you know, the various perspective across Christian communities and why, and, you know, is it because there's a scriptural text or it's precedent or whatnot, and the complexities and the arguments. And then, so, I mean, it's an issue we all struggle with, and I think it's when we connect that we can better have the conversations with within our own communities when we connect across with the other.
Given time is running a little short, we'll try to get a couple of questions in. Maybe then we'll keep answers brief and try to get a couple more. And then I want to have time for some closing comments about U.S. Foreign policy, the implications of this for that. So, sir.
My name is Bruce Knotts, and I'm the director of the Unitarian Universalist United Nations Office, and I'm also a retired Foreign Service officer. And my question is also for Imam Yahya Hindi. You and I actually met probably over 10 years ago. You'd be forgiven if you don't remember our conversation. But at the time, I was a practicing Muslim, and I really felt my Islamic prayers as I said them, and they meant something to me. And I was a member of Dar al-Hijra Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, and basically the theme that I heard over and over and over again was, we are better than the Christians because we're more homophobic than they are. And I found my I no longer felt my prayers anymore, and I started feeling, okay, I'm just doing these prayers for rote, just because I'm supposed to, and I thought that's not why I want to pray, and so I stopped, and I left, and I'm now a Unitarian Universalist. But this message that you're talking about of inclusiveness and space for everybody, my question is, does that include LGBT people?
Thank you. And could we have your question as well, sir?
My name is Mike Gauss. I'm with the Center for Pluralism. This question is for Professor Haddad. You mentioned pluralism is an inclusion, was an American initiative, something to that effect, but pluralism has been there in Islam right from the very beginning, from the very first verse, which is inclusive of the entire universe. Then there is a lot of work done on inclusion and pluralism in India, in Spain, and it has been revived by His Highness Aga Khan through the university in Toronto about pluralism. And there is a lot of work I have written on pluralism in Islam. So is this narrative you mentioned fringe or is it mainstream? And the second question for Imam Hindi, you mentioned undermining others to glorify yourselves. Is this a fringe or is it a mainstream idea?
Thank you. Yeah, perhaps we could take that question first, and then we can go back to the other question for Imam Handy. Yeah, we do.
Very, very briefly, I would say it depends on where you are. I think it is the overwhelming experience in so many countries. The only way to feel good about me is to undermine someone else. And therefore, the majority feels empowered by undermining someone else. And we all do that. Politically, we do that. Economically, we do that. Socially, we do that. And religiously, we do that. Unfortunately, religion becomes also a part of those tools used to undermine others by glorifying me. Or, well, I have a direct voice to God and a direct connection with God, but you don't like the question there, and I'll answer it now. My theology, my understanding of Islam says, and Muslims here can disagree with me or agree, I don't know. I say only God has the right to judge people's actions, whether LGBTQ or Christians or Jews or Muslims. I stand before God doing the best I could to be the best a human being, and I don't know what happened in the life to come. So yes, LGBTQ and every kind of orientation, whether political, religious, ideological, is and has a room around the table of God. This is the kind of God I love and I worship.
What pluralism in Islam do you want to comment?
Right. Pluralism in Islam, I mean, there are verses in the Quran that are pluralistic, and there are verses that are very unpluralistic. You know, when it says, "Kuntum khayru ummatin ukhrijat ila nas," you are the best community, you command what is good, and you prohibit what is evil. That means that anybody who is different than you can condemn as evil. And so if you take that verse, which is what Sayyid Qutb did and what some of the Islamists teach, it is not pluralism. So the same thing you can find in Christianity, you can find in Judaism, you can find in Hinduism. All religions have an exclusive concept that we are the best, that we are chosen by God, we are the children of God. You know, unless you believe in Jesus Christ, you will not, you know, that's what my mother always taught me. You know, and so every religion has both. The question is, which one do you choose? And usually people who call for pluralism are the weak ones, and ones in power want to maintain power. Now, you know, like the Ismailis are a weak community. Politically, they're you know, incorporated in England and in Canada. They're very strong in Canada. But in the Muslim community, they're considered as kuffar. And of course, they will talk about pluralism if you're looking at it from the outside, okay? But they have their own selection. I mean, they believe that you know, the Aga Khan is special, and they are special. Is that inclusive? It means those who are not, you know, from the community are less.
I'll send you an email
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I do want us to close the panel with a discussion of one last question, and that is, what does the discussion that we've had have to say to those in the Religion and Global Affairs Office at the State Department? In other words, what are the implications of our conversation for their work? What are things that the United States government in the Religion and Global Affairs Office can do to advance and promote the candles we've been talking about, the positive developments? What are things that the government should avoid that are going to be dangerous? Special Representative Sean Casey is sitting in the back there taking some notes. What advice would you have for those of us, those like
I'll start
Representative
because
Casey
I'm
in
the
government who are
negative
trying to
one.
work
Right.
conscientiously on this?
I'm the
issue?
negative one on this panel. Everybody is very positive. I will start by saying you have to stop that $38 billion gift to Israel, because Israel is promoting xenophobia. As long as Christians and Muslims in Israel are treated as different, we are implicated because they consider us as empowering Israel and giving it money and sustenance and power. And now we're overpowering it. And I've seen the reaction in the Muslim community. It is very negative because they see it as our, on one hand we send delegations, say, we want pluralism, we love you. And on the other hand, we're giving all that power, which is seen as meant to destroy and divide, I mean, one of the things that they're talking about now, very seriously is what's happening in Syria and the fact that Mrs. Clinton had an email that said it's necessary to keep fighting because it's, quote unquote, in the interest of Israel. And this is when, at the time when there was a plan to have peace. So as long as we close our eye on what Israel is doing, we're in trouble.
Okay.
So I would
Paul,
just
yeah,
add
you
to
already
that.
began to talk about this, sustaining
and
programs and not
I
just
don't think
one
any
program.
one entity is the problem. I think we need to be careful. So
Right.
we differ on that. There's all sorts of groups that are spreading hatred and xenophobia, state actors, non-state actors. I wouldn't want to single out any one of them. There's a lot of things I could say to the Foreign Service officers in terms of training, in terms of a longer-term vision. I sometimes wonder what they're being incentivized by when they're told to write reports back to headquarters. Are they being incentivized to write about bad religion, about controlling religion? Or how are they being incentivized? I want, in my interactions with them, and they're goodwill people, but I just get a sense that they themselves are being forced to concentrate on the bad. And I guess in addition to that, in addition to inviting them, and they understand they've got a partnership, that they've got to partner with academic institutions, with NGOs, they're not trained, they're not skilled for this, and they know that. There's a certain humility there. But what I would call them to is to see the possibility in what I call ideal religious pluralism, right? So there's practical religious pluralism, which has been practiced by states since the Roman Empire. Basically, there's the state view, and then like everyone else can pursue their private religions at home, and that's it. That's the kind of the practical, because that's the only way we're going to have stability, right? Well, I think what's happening now more and more is what I would call an ideal religious pluralism. When Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, when they can all do their God talk in the public space together, and maybe it requires doing shared projects or really understanding how their religions are knowledge-based tied together. But I guess what I would call our brothers and sisters in the Foreign Service is not to just assume secularization is the answer. That I, as a Christian,
Or privatization.
yeah, there's just so much wonderful energy when we're talking about God together. I mean, it takes a lot. It's a bit of a risk, but I don't think if we go back to that, like get them in their boxes, that's just not going to solve the problem.
Thank you. Imam Hendi or Imam Maktoum? I want to hear from both of you.
For me, 4 points. Number one, continuity of programs as you engage religious actors.
Continue, sorry.
Of programs.
Yeah.
So it should not be
Yeah,
a
continue.
one.
Yeah, sustain.
Yes,
Exactly.
sustainable
Yeah.
programs.
Yeah.
Number two, magnify the good stories of interreligious dialogue. In America, we have so much good we can talk about as we engage other countries and elsewhere. And number three, remember that religion is not a problem, but rather is a part of the solution.
Thank you.
I'm not going to ask my question.
Okay, sure, yeah.
I was called out as, the only female
Yes.
Muslim chaplain in
Yeah.
the audience
Yeah.
about my title. And yes, I did say I don't want to be referred to as an imama because let me decide what I want to be called. There's many reasons for why that is the case, and I want to make sure my voice is heard since I was called out, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to say that. I'm not going to ask my question, but I think a lot of this has to do with understanding the cultural context of which you're in. Sheikha is absolutely fine. You can call me Sheikha or Ustada Tahira because I see myself in the role of a teacher. But I think often within the Muslim community with young men and women, imama is often in their minds, and this has to do with the way in which the Muslim men have framed this into conversation, not Muslim women. That somehow I'm going to start leading co-ed gendered spaces in actual salah, which again is open to discussion as well. That's a separate conversation. But I think it's important to recognize that, in this conversation, we're talking a lot about power and privilege and how it really affects minorities that are struggling to have what is considered conversations that will move a community forward, particularly religious communities. And yes, women play a huge role in that, but I think it's important let us decide what we're going to be called and let us lead that process.
Thank you. Imam Maktoum, you have the last word.
Well, so I agree with everything Imam Hindi said about what the U.S. government and especially the State Department should do. One point I would add to that is the United States gives a lot of money, a lot of our tax dollars to a lot of Muslim countries. I come originally from Afghanistan, and I've lived in Pakistan as well. And I think we have a lot of leverage to use in those countries, and that leverage we see sometimes is being used in not very good ways. You see in Egypt, the United States is basically supporting Sisi, which I understand the concerns, and there is a lot of nuance there. But so that leverage is there, and it needs to be used in particular, and because that's where I came from, Pakistan and Afghanistan. What the Pakistani government does in terms of providing sanctuary to these violent extremist groups while they're getting our tax dollars. That doesn't make sense. And the huge corruption that's going on in Afghanistan, and we are bankrolling that. We can hold them more accountable, and we can just make that count, and I think that's doable. In particular, in Afghanistan, the National Unity Government was pretty much negotiated by Secretary Kerry, and so we have a lot of leverage that needs to be used. And one last thing is the student visa should be a little bit more easily available because there's so many Afghans and Pakistani students that I know that they want to come to the U.S. and go to school here. It's just almost impossible to get a student visa. And that can change so much. I mean, when they come here and they get the American, I'm an example of, how I grew up and the way I experienced religion was very exclusive. And so any open-mindedness that I may have, I owe it to America. A lot of that can happen when we allow when we relax these rules and allow more people to come and experience America, so that the beautiful aspects of America can be taken back to the Muslim world.
Thank you very much. Well, that's a wonderful note on which to end. First, let me say some apologies to those who wanted to ask a question or make a comment but didn't have the opportunity to do so. I'm very sorry that we had to cut short the discussion, the Q&A with you all. But let me also, on behalf of the Berkley Center, express my warm thanks to this outstanding panel, Imam Maktoum, Imam Hindi, Professor Haddad, Professor Heck. Thank you very much for an extraordinarily rich conversation. And thank you to Special Representative Sean Casey, to your wonderful team. The opportunity to co-sponsor this conference was a great privilege for us. Thank you for being with us at Georgetown. And please join me in thanking the panel again. Thank you.